We'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room, episode 224 for July the 21st, 2021. My name is Wes Fryer. I am coming to you from Oklahoma City, where I am being dissuaded from wearing my glasses because my ring light makes me look like a goof, and I don't know how I'm going to resolve that issue. Just first world problems all over the place tonight. But I'm joined, as always, by the man with a mane, who I do not think has cut his hair in many months. His name is Dr. Jason Neiffer. He is the EdTech Yoda and tech news guru of the North. How are you tonight, Dr. Neiffer?
Well, other than my long hair, it was February 29th, 2020 when I got my last haircut. So, yeah, I'm still kind of quarantined off, so I will continue to sport this very, very, very long hair. I had long-ish hair in college. It's nothing compared to what I've got going here. But this podcast, sadly, is not about my hair. Instead, this is the EdTech Situation Room, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, which is Montana State Virtual School, located in kind of smoky Missoula, Montana. A little, I'd call the air chewy out there, just a little extra something in the air tonight. But we're also not here to talk about weather. Wes, what is the EdTech Situation Room?
Well, we are here after our 4-week hiatus. We were back last week, but we had a little break for the summer. But we're going to talk about the past week's technology headlines through an educational lens. We've got a litany of links that you can check out at edtechsr.com/links. And as always, we have a variety of articles, which probably maybe we shouldn't start there, but we can talk a lot about the tech correction, but we have other articles tonight too, touching on Apple, Google, the culture war, social media, new media, privacy, COVID, and of course, our geeks of the week. So, Dr. Neiffer, actually, I want to ask you, how is the Moodle moot before we jump into the articles?
Truly outstanding. Once again, shout out to the good folks at Carol, Ryan Hazen and Dan Case, who put on that conference for, I think, almost 10, 11 years now. Hands down, the best Moodle event in the United States, certainly the best small conference in the United States too, but just really community-oriented, and they decided for safety reasons that they would have it online again this year. I think that was a good call on their part, but I was able to connect with a lot of my good friends in the Moodle community, and then also they attract kind of the region's EdTech folks as well, so that's always a super nice event. And my understanding is that they're going to put all the sessions on YouTube, so you can see all the stuff there, especially if you do anything in or around Moodle, then that would be a good place to find resources.
Absolutely. And Dr. Neiffer tweeted the playlist, I think, or retweeted Moot's tweet of that playlist. So, as has been the case for a while, there is a incredible plethora of free professional development available online. And if she joins, she may join us live, she may not, but Peggy George, our fan number one, is always one of the foremost sharers of opportunities for awesome professional development. So I was in the 2021 Summer Institute in Digital Literacy, again online this year, and that was happening last week, and I just ended up not double booking myself. I was actually faculty this year. This was my third year to participate. So it was excellent. But the Zoom fatigue was real, and I think it was palpable, and we could sense it. It was great. It was fantastic. But man, next summer, hopefully, Delta variant will be behind us. It'd sure be nice to be able to go back to face-to-face conferences. So, Jason, where would you like to start with tonight's articles?
Well, so many interesting topics, but let's start with maybe, it's not quite breaking news, but it was surprising. I have some additional details about it. Automatic, which is the company that owns and makes WordPress, and large kind of open source company that sells a lot of services related, runs more than a third of websites on Earth, has purchased something we've talked about here in the past, which is the app Pocket Cast, which is a podcast aggregator. In fact, I would guess that a serious number of our regular listeners are Pocket Cast users, as am I and Dr. Fryer. But the reason, they bought it from a consortium of public radio and public media companies including NPR. And in the last year, the BBC has even invested in the consortium that runs the app. And the reason why I saw this, or I thought this to be so curious, was the fact that the good folks at HotPod, which is a subscription email list that sends out podcasting news, I was alerted to the sale because of them. And they also noted that NPR has reported, as part of its, it's a nonprofit, but as part of its reporting, that they've lost $800,000 already. So that was being part of the consortium that owns the Pocket Cast company. And I'll admit, I am not an entrepreneur. I don't have super great business sense from the standpoint of I don't know what it goes into making and running an app, but I feel like that in the last couple of years, that Pocket Cast has evolved a bit in its economic model. For example, they started charging a regular fee to get some of the extra features that come with Pocket Cast, and that annoyed some lifetime members, although frankly I was quite happy to pay for it because of how much I find value out of that particular app. But it just goes back to the fact to say that even things that have a cost to them aren't necessarily economically sustainable. And, WordPress has managed to make WordPress work in that it's software it gives away. And in fact, every single time I've used WordPress in any context in my professional or personal life, it's been the free version. I've never paid for a WordPress service. They've managed to make it work. So we'll see if the kind of freemium model that Pocket Cast has been attempting to make happen can make that happen.
Yeah, I really hope that we're going to continue to see independent, non-Spotify, non-Apple, non-Google podcast platforms. Everything's dynamic in technology. We see lots of change, and I don't want to say inevitable, but the creep or move in the podcasting world certainly is to large platforms that especially can apply surveillance capitalism, gather data, be able to crowdsource recommendations, help with discovery, and then give you metrics and analytics, on your listening. And so the early days of podcasting where, we had our little podcatcher and Pocket Cast fit into that mold. I think it was an Australian group that started it initially, just as small time developers. But yes, it's wonderful. I do listen, on my Google Assistant to podcasts from time to time, but I really don't want I don't want everything certainly to go inside a walled garden. But I think it's a little bit like fighting the tide, maybe a bit, because those apps that I mentioned seem, they have market share, they have size, and they're bringing podcasts to a larger audience, which, in the case of social media, I don't know. I mean, we may talk a little bit about, some different fringe apps and things like that are out there in phones and stuff like that. And so it's, there's positives and negatives to all kinds of technology, but podcasting is fantastic. It continues to be one of the ways that on a day, if not a day, almost a daily basis, especially in the summertime, I'm learning stuff. So check out Pocket Casts. I'm glad to see they're going to, live on with Automatic, and I'm a huge WordPress advocate and user and fan. And so I think that sounds like a really good home for Pocket Cast. So I'm happy.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, where to next, sir?
Oh, let's see. Let's pick up your privacy article that you did for Recode. I got to read this whole one before the show. The title is From Macy's to Albertsons, Facial Recognition is Already Everywhere. And this was from Recode on July the 19th. There have been, I think, 2 states, Virginia and Colorado, that are cited in the article that have passed some privacy protections. There's also a really good EFF article that you put in that kind of touches on this as well. But this article by Rebecca Heilwell from July 19th says that, there's facial recognition happening. In fact, I guess in the Rite Aid, they were rolling that out over like 10 years, and then they abruptly said, oh, we're abandoning it. But, in order to increase profits and, possibly reduce theft, monitor employees, there's a lot of different reasons that companies give. But the thing is, you can't opt out. And we have virtually no privacy protection laws in the United States today. The GDPR is the General Directive on privacy regulation, I think, was what it stands for, and that's in Europe. And so, Congress has proposed legislation, but we don't have anything federally. So Illinois has a strong biometric law that prohibits, I guess, the anonymous, collection of, well, not anonymous, just the collection of biometric data without permission.
Right.
So this fight for the future is initiative that's calling out companies that are using the technology. And, like perhaps we'll talk about with that EFF article where it comes to 0 days and the way stuff's hidden, the whole data collection and sales, industry, which is the undergird surveillance capitalism. It's a lot of stuff that people aren't really aware of. So I appreciated you putting that article in, and I think I'm a little surprised. My perception is, focus on the government side of it. Oh, you go to London, you're going to be, under surveillance. So I don't think there's really a clear harm that a lot of people are seeing, and so this isn't a bandwagon that a lot of people are on. So what's your forecast? Do you see the situation changing much in the future, that people are going to, push along with these other tech regulation pushes for something that touches on facial recognition? Or do you think we're just kind of blissfully ignorant as a society and we're going to remain that way?
Well, and the fact that you expressed surprise, I expressed surprise when looking at this. And I guess in the big picture, I really shouldn't be, because there's been a ton of tracking efforts that are targeting us individually. I think facial recognition is a very, I'm not saying this to be crass, in your face version of it, right? That it's certainly something that's capturing data, our likeness, that I think we tend to think is a little more serious. But I mean, a variety of businesses have been using low energy Bluetooth tracking for some time now, and everything from how you flow to the store. Low energy Bluetooth, I believe, has a unique identifier involved in it, and so it can track, maybe not necessarily who you are directly, but perhaps that you as a user may come into a certain store. But the thing I appreciated about this article and broad recognition of this as an issue is, the bottom line is that it's going on whether you like it or not, and it's not something that necessarily you're being notified about on your way into stores. Now, I happen to know Albertsons is a popular chain in Montana, so there are Albertsons here. I've not been to one in about 18 months or so, but they, for example, always, I know this just because it's always interesting to me. They oftentimes have signs on their front door that say that there are devices recording, right? Which is not really that unusual, right? That having security cameras on in a store is not that unusual, but that also may cover them in regards to notification laws, which I don't know if they exist here in Montana or not for that process. So it is kind of a rabbit hole, but it is a serious what if in regards to privacy.
So I want to take a stab at Peggy's comments in the chat. She says that she doesn't really understand the benefits of facial recognition for retail stores, and it sounds like a solution looking for a problem. Well, I mean, here's the problem. It's the collection of aggregated data about each one of us, and in this case, without any opportunity to be able to opt in or opt out. There is a tremendously large opaque cloud of data that continues to be gathered about us, which data brokers, that was the term I was looking for earlier, are able to sell, to the highest bidder. They're able to sell to governments. We'll talk about this EFF article that talks about, I think, the Pegasus spyware and the way in which journalists and human rights and democracy advocates have been killed in different places. And so, but there's a much less harsh and not life or death kind of scenario that involves, advertising and folks just really wanting to track us and know us. But in terms of, I can imagine how this is probably going down in these stores. How are they going to identify you and know you for sure? Well, when you check out, when you use your credit card, when you put in your frequent shopper, which usually means your phone number, which is a number now that is probably as important or more important than the social security number, because anytime you talk about databases, you need key fields, and those are the things that connect you to your data. And so your phone number, your credit card information, and now your face. And see, the thing about it is we can get new credit card numbers and we can change cell phone numbers, but you really can't get a new face. And so the folks that are concerned about biometric data and their collection, just like any other kind of data collection, is that we have literally no power to stop what is going to happen to that data after it is collected. It can be hacked, it can be sold, and when it comes to biometric data, that kind of data is private and permanent in a way that a social security number, a social security number, we can't really change those, but a phone number and a credit card, those are not permanent in the same kind of way. So I do think this is an important thing to help educate people about. You've got, we've had things about number of the beast and being tracked and fears about chips and good grief. I don't know if we'll do this article, but like a recent study, it had 1,500 people in the study, but it was saying that 20% of Americans think that the COVID vaccines are implanting microchips for Bill Gates. 20% of adults are thinking that today. And, so we have a broad awareness about how, the surveillance state and the Orwellian state could be bad and we don't want to have it. But biometrics is not something that, we're able to even know it's going on. And I think that's what is surprising. And because of the permanency of it and the fact that data then, maybe we don't care that someone knows that I'm buying some Aleve or I'm getting, a Coke or a root beer, but, put together all the data that people collect about us that is then used, it's part of this bigger picture of surveillance capitalism and these things that people are doing about it. So, yeah, I don't know if I did a great job with that, but I think the fact that it's hard to explain is also part of the issue, right? Because it's like, well, why I don't care. We've had surveillance cameras around, so why should I care?
Well, and to go back to the original article for Recode as well, that stores are claiming this is for theft reasons, right? And one reason, that said, that there are so many other ways people could use data associated to an individual, right? So even analyzing things like facial expressions and body movement as it relates to specific aisles in a store. What I would additionally say is that I do think that these are debates that are coming to schools near you as well, right? In the same way that a lot of schools have adopted security cameras, I would imagine the facial recognition technology is probably, from a price standpoint, a bit prohibitive to consider in a lot of scenarios within schools. But at some point, this is going to also be a tool available to schools. And ignoring the student piece for a moment, right, which itself is a big can of worms. Imagine, working in a school where your movement is tracked around the building and what happens to that data. And, even if there is a security or safety argument to be made, these are serious policy debates we need to have in and around education.
And I will say that this is the inexorable trajectory of technology. And we see that impact in school where administrators and leaders are given more and more power to do more with data, limiting the data that people have access to. In the case of surveillance, it's as the technology director at our school for 4 years, we were and still are, I think, keeping all of that video data in-house. But there are some really powerful platforms that if you're willing to send your video data into the cloud, I remember watching an ad for one of these. They could say, hey, in the last 30 days, have we had any white Jeeps, come onto our campus? And you can query with, some high levels of sophistication, querying video in the same way that you would query text. And so, yes, to Jason's point, thinking about what that looks like, I don't think parents are going to put up with, you just, implanted a chip in my kid's arm, so we know when they're on the bus. But we've had some things like that happen where people for, knowing about where kids are and keeping them safe and things like that. The biometric scan is not something that requires you to carry a card or to have a chip or a special watch or anything like that. And it is coming. I'm going to just forecast that right now. This is coming to school video surveillance systems. And, we're gonna make decisions about this as organizations and all kinds of entities, just as businesses are as well. So what I would say overall is that the push for privacy and for some regulation in this market, because it's pretty much a wild west of no regulation in almost the entire country. There's only a few, I think they said like Colorado and Virginia, maybe the only states that have a privacy law right now. Illinois has a biometric law. So there's some, but by and large, there's a wild west, and biometrics is a pretty important topic. And hey, if you're teaching a technology or media literacy class touching on current issues, talking about biometric data and privacy would be a pretty good topic to pick up on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why don't I throw this article in because I already mentioned it. This is coming to us from The Hill, and it was a July 19th article. Alarming number of Americans think vaccines contain microchips to control people. And again, it's like 1,500 people in this poll. I think it was a YouGov poll, and they were finding that 20%. So the number of people who are really anti-vaxxers. We were just up in South Dakota and Wyoming. We live in Oklahoma. There's a lot of people out there, and that study, it portends the impacts for us in schools with masks and, with Delta variants and things like that, as we're wondering about what we're going to have to do, what we need to do to keep ourselves safe and keep our students safe as we head back into the school year. So that one I put a number of articles under the COVID heading. So we could go down that rabbit hole, or we can maintain our distance from the tech correction for a little bit longer, Dr. Neifer, and go somewhere else. And maybe we should do that, because sometimes we just fall into that hole for about 30 minutes.
Sure. Let's well, the problem is that the next topic I was going to look at was culture wars.
Well, you've got a few carryovers under the Apple and Google.
I do.
heading.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of quick Apple articles. Great Lifehacker article from June 30th, the best iPad drawing apps that aren't Adobe Fresco. The reason why this particular article gained my interest is because I didn't realize that Adobe is discontinuing Photoshop, Sketch, and the Illustrator Draw apps, which are both great apps. And part of this is that I wanted to note that, I, in my slow movement back to Apple world, I did purchase a used iPad Air 3 earlier this year, and then picked up a used Apple Pencil. And it is a very stunning and compelling a hardware match that, in fact, the other day I had a reason to refresh my digital signature that I put on paper documents through a drawing app. But the Lifehacker goes through the new app, which again is called Fresco, and then there are some other apps including the Autodesk Sketchbook, which is something I've used before. It's a really great sketchnoting app, I might note. iPad Procreate, Clip Art or Clip Studio Paint, the Affinity Designer and Affinity Photo, which are also companion apps to wonderful Adobe alternatives on the Mac operating system, and Linea Sketch, which is another a great app. But if you're noticing that those great apps are going away, and it was Illustrator Draw for me that was the one that I used quite a bit, because it allowed you to kind of draw signatures to turn into vector images, then these are alternatives to that app.
Yep, and Procreate is at the top of that list, and I would put that at the top as well. It is a paid app, but I love using that for sketchnoting. One thing I'd say in terms of using this with students, because last year our sixth graders all had iPads, and I was able to teach a sketchnoting unit and love that. This year we're going to have touch Dell Chromebooks, and we are having styluses. So anyway, I need to still do a little more testing this summer, because I love sketchnoting. But I like a simpler sketchnoting app, especially as students are getting started. Adobe Fresco, which is a very powerful and free app, is just, fairly complicated with just, hundreds, if not thousands of brush choices and, just textures and all and lots and lots. So, but hey, great recap of some good choices. And if you're not doing sketchnoting and offering sketchnoting as an option to your students as a good way for them to process and then also show and make their thinking visible to you and their classmates and retell the key points of a lesson or video, sketchnoting is a great strategy. So have you played at all with sketchnoting apps on a Chromebook, Dr. Neifer?
I have not. The closest I've gotten to that was and I forgot the name of the app that we had just talked about. And I'm going to fill some time while I scroll back down to that. The Autodesk Sketchbook, which is a really, really great app. And I believe that there is an equivalent on the Chromebook, but I have not played with it yet.
Okay. Well, we have, a Google Play Store for students, and we have to get things, approved and put in there. And it's, sometimes there's not a tremendous benefit and difference to an app version versus just a web version. But yeah, if anybody listening to the show is playing at all with sketchnoting apps and Chromebooks, that'll be something I need to delve into. Yep. All right. How about that last Apple article? Should we pick that one up?
Yeah, in part, and I think you dropped this one in there. So why don't you give us the quick intro?
Yeah, so I, periodically listen to the This Week in Tech Twit podcast, and a week or so ago, they were talking about this right to repair. And so this is an article from today, July 21st. FTC unanimously adopts the right to repair policy to reduce restrictions from manufacturers like Apple. Now, to be fair, this isn't all about Apple, but Apple has been called out specifically by the FTC. But like John Deere tractors, that's actually a company that's really been, lobbying heavy against this. And, the idea is, look, if I buy this pen, I should be able to do what I want to with this pen. If I want to hack this pen and use it to fix my car or something else, or this breaks and I get a spring from somewhere else, I should be able to do what I want because I've bought it. But with smartphones, with tractors, with some other kinds of appliances, there are companies that really don't want you to be able to fix your own device. And so this article talks about how, this harms consumers, it harms competition, it also just harms consumer rights. And so, the last quote of this, the last paragraph of this quote, these types of restrictions can significantly raise costs for consumers, stifle innovation, close off business opportunity for independent repair shops, create unnecessary electronic waste, delay timely repairs, and undermine resiliency, FTC Chair Lisa Khan said. So we definitely have some folks with different perspectives than those of the past 4 years in office in places like the FTC. I really think that this pro-consumer position is positive. I don't think it's going to cripple, Apple's innovation. And it's going to help consumers. I mean, we've even had that with batteries and battery replacement, right? Like there was a big snafu at one point, because I think Apple was saying, well, you can't, replace this battery here. Nobody else can. So are Montana farmers going to be cheering tonight, Jason, for this? Because, tractors are going to be, possibly repairable. Is this seriously something you think that does impact the farming and ranching economy in the state?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And in fact, the way I first learned of the right to repair because of articles regarding industrial equipment, and don't get me wrong, modern day farm equipment is extremely advanced, and satellite guided and GPS aimed with interesting nuances, just like the modern automobile. But there's a lot of folks that utilize 20, 30, 40-year-old equipment to much advantage, and the reason why they're able to do that is because they know how to fix their own stuff. It's the same too of older automobile owners and buffs. That it's the same way. It'll be interesting to me from the standpoint of right to repair doesn't. I mean, what it would effectively do is eliminate companies from voiding warranties. For example, when you attempt to to repair your own equipment. But the other part of this that I think is a harder discussion is, the right to repair doesn't mean that you have a right to get a piece of equipment that is repairable. And I think that's a very important distinction, because the reason why Apple doesn't allow you to change your battery is because a long time ago they decided that user replaceable batteries would eliminate the visual attractiveness of devices and also make them thicker. And it's the reason why Apple's been consistently moving against user replaceable batteries. And I don't see them suddenly increasing the thickness of an iPhone, for example, by 20 or 30% to put something that is more end user serviceable, like a battery. But I do think that eliminating the possibility of voiding the warranty with legitimate end user replaceable parts. I can think of a lot of laptops that I've repaired over time that, adding RAM to them. Apple's moving towards a one board solution. If you open up the new MacBook Pro M1 or the iMac M1, there's just a single board sitting in there. There's nothing even hanging off of it because they've integrated all that into the board itself. So we're not necessarily talking about that, but it will be interesting to see, how Apple responds to this, especially since they've been specifically called out by the FTC in regards to their lack of repairability and the steps they've taken to diminish the right to repair.
Peggy asked in the chat, is this a copyright issue and who owns the rights? We've also seen this in printers, right? With some printer companies that have forbidden you to ever use a printer replacement cartridge that's not, manufactured and sold by them. So it touches on copyright and intellectual property, but I'm not a lawyer, but I think that this is more like terms of use, perhaps. And, this idea of the right to repair, they assert through your purchase of it, I guess, and your agreement with their desires. I don't know exactly if that's terms of service or what that's called, but it's like, hey, you've bought a HP Brother whatever printer, and we're not, and we say that you agree you will only use our stuff, and so you'll void warranties and things like that. It's kind of weird, but it definitely is sort of it's a way of controlling consumer behavior. And really the weird thing is like tractors, that doesn't seem, but hey, you want to talk high tech, we had a friend who worked for Monsanto when we lived in Lubbock, Texas, and the level of, GPS data gathering and knowing exactly what the yield was on this exact square, foot of cotton farm and what, how much fertilizer. And anyway, it's incredible how high tech farming can be. So companies want to obviously have return on investment and they want to be profitable, but at the same time, it can seem ridiculous when you say, well, I'm gonna void the warranty. I mean, how expensive are tractors? Hundreds of thousands of dollars, in some cases for combines, and I'm speaking as if I really know a lot about farming. They cost a lot of money. They're big.
And to be clear, that is totally that would additionally be a part of my grandfather was a homesteader. He had a large farm. My mom's side of the family actually owns tractor dealerships in southern Germany, so it is my heritage. But I also can speak with no expertise here either. I know a lot about Chromebooks.
That's right. Well, hey, speaking of that, you've got a few Google articles, including some carryovers from last week. So do you want to pick up any of those?
Just a couple quick ones. This one I've already noticed. This is from 9 to 5 Google on June 26th, which is, and we might have mentioned this one last week, but it's still worth saying because I've now had an opportunity to use it. Chrome is getting a more functional Zoom app. And if you go to install in the Play Store, because they are moving away from, the Chrome store as it plays out, then it's now installing a progressive web app that's a more advanced app than it was before. And in fact, one of the reasons why that I have tended to use Chrome OS less than the last 2 years is only because I spent so much time on video conferencing. And although Google Meets is great, on Chrome OS. Zoom is less functional. The Mac and PC apps are way more functional, and Zoom is moving towards a progressive web app that has more function available to the end user. So great news for Chrome OS users, especially those of you that sit a lot on Zoom meetings.
We might have picked up this article too, and I just moved it, up. But there's in 2 days, on July 23rd, there's a YouTube deadline for unlisted videos. If you made any videos you uploaded before 2017 private, unless you fill out a form as a YouTube user on Friday, all of those unlisted videos are going to become private. You could still change them to unlisted, but you have to fill out a form to do that. So maybe we talked about that, but the deadline is in 2 days, and Friday. So if you have a YouTube channel, if you have any videos that are unlisted and you had content there before 2017, that is an article actually from 9 to 5 Google on June 23rd to pay attention to and fill out that form.
Okay, great. Let's see. Interesting article from Kevin Toffel's blog on Chromebooks. Here's why I can't pick the best Chromebook. And he's talking about, why Chromebooks are a little complicated in picking them. And I only wanted to mention this article in part because I do think standards are changing a little bit in regards to my old advice would have been, well, it still is. You really do need a Chromebook with 8 gigabytes of RAM to be able, I think, to future-proof the Chromebook. If you want to use it more than 3 or 4 years, I think 8's got to be a minimum. I would also say that there's a lot of evidence that some of the more budget-friendly chips are starting to become fast enough to where they could run a Chromebook with multitasking, like multiple tabs, maybe even many multimedia tabs in back, to be able to still be a power user's machine. And there's a lot of people that try to claim, what is the greatest Chromebook, or what Chromebook should you buy right now. But I think Mr. Toffel does a really great job of making the argument that it's really a what do you want to do with it kind of question more than anything else.
And mentioned in that article, and it's actually a response to this, This Week in Google, which I also listen to some more infrequently than Twit or Security Now. But Jeff Jarvis was actually talking about this. He's kind of responding. And the great analogy here is, if you're walking into a car dealership and you just say, what's the best car? It all depends. It depends on your budget. It depends upon your preferences. It depends on your priorities. It might be easy to steer you to the most expensive car on the lot, but that's not going to be the best choice for everyone. So About Chromebooks is a fantastic website, and Kevin Toffel is a fantastic tech journalist who is always staying on top of Chrome world as well as many other things. So
absolutely,
definitely a good person. I dropped the link into that YouTube opt-out form that we mentioned earlier. So yeah, it's if you don't want your unlisted content to go to private automatically, fill that out ASAP.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
How about let's talk about this Freedom Phone. Can we do that? Can we talk culture war? It's going to risk, talking a little politics here, but we're focusing on technology, folks. So
I spent some time there today, actually. The article intrigued me. So first, Wes, why don't you talk about what is the Freedom Phone?
Well, the headline here from Ars Technica yesterday on July 20th is the MAGA-targeted Freedom Phone has a breathtaking amount of red flags. Subtitle, analysis, no specs listed, uncensored app store looks like Google Play. So, as we've talked about on the show, and most of us are aware, there's a lot of hoopla, proposed legislation, conversation, angry people over, tech censorship, the alleged and real, censorship of people from tech platforms like Twitter, like Facebook and YouTube. And there are folks that are primarily, in this case, conservative and right-wing, who have wanted to create their own platforms. We've talked on the show before about Parler, which was supposed to be, and I think it's still been reborn, with the CEO gone and things have changed. But anyway, there is a market, for folks that don't want to be censored. And so the guy who has started this company for the Freedom Phone, this is being promoted as a $500 smartphone. Apparently, and the guy is named Eric Finman. He's the self-described world's youngest Bitcoin millionaire, and it's going to ship in August. And it, is supposed to like have no censorship. So you're going to be able, even if Google removes something from the App Store, you're still going to be able to get it. But evidently, there's a Chinese tech company called Umadigi that has manufactured it, and so they think it's a rebranded Umadigi A9 Pro. It's about $120 phone. But what they go into some detail in the article is that it's actually pretty difficult to run your own app store and be able to keep apps if they're going to be discontinued. It's a challenge. It's more than just selling hardware. So anyway, there's not a lot of specs for this, and they're saying there's a lot of security flags, but maybe some people are going to shell out $500 for it. One of the things I thought was most interesting in the article was that they listed, in addition to Parler, quote, other right-wing apps. And so Newsmax, OANN, as news platforms that some people, and I think President Trump had actually pushed people to abandon Fox and go to these. And then this app called Rumble, which is a video platform that's actually Canadian-based. But one of the things that they're saying in this article is, we'll never censor, and you're going to have to. Like, there is illegal content, that is going to have to be dealt with. And this idea that we could have absolute unfettered free speech, let people share and do whatever they want, just doesn't work in a nation of laws. So interesting. What did you find curious about the article, Jason?
Well, there's obviously a lot going on here. The part that the nerd in me immediately latched onto the fact that this is an Android phone that's being divorced of Google services, but then they're trying to build up something on top of it, right? And I did also find interesting in the article, there's a couple of things. Ron Armadio is the author of the article, is a longtime Android journalist, and there was a couple things I found interesting. The first one was that I went to the website and looked at the Freedom Phone, and Ron had noted in the article that they were allowing you to stack coupons, and so you could effectively get the phone down to $0 plus $20 shipping. I was able to do that. I decided I didn't really want to give my credit card number over to do that. But I did almost consider doing that. It's $500 for the phone, but you can stack all these coupons, and it looks like they might have even guessed some coupons. MAGA, for example, got a $50 off. Trump 2024, Parler also picked off that. But then also they are installing an open source store that they control, that has access to apps that are open source apps, but also that they, I would imagine, are also giving or allowing you to install apps from these selected third parties that they believe either aren't available on other platforms or are heavily restricted. So from that standpoint, it's interesting. The other thing that also could be a possibility here is that rather than getting mixed up in the political intrigue of this, they are selling the phone for $500. And from the guess of the journalist in this article, this was a phone that retailed for $160. And so the hardware itself may actually be radically overpriced, and it could really just be a play to bilk people of a certain political persuasion into believing that they're getting this, this real Freedom Phone, which they're paying a huge price for. The other thing you don't know is that you have no idea what else is tracking you on these phones. You have no other idea what pieces of these are, and so I think that's an important piece here to be very cognizant of. That you're not just buying a phone, but since it isn't under one of the major marketplaces, you would be absolutely vulnerable to whoever is pushing code and updates to that phone.
Absolutely, yeah. And just kind of like jailbreaking your device, or what is it? What's it called when you do that to the Android? It's not called jailbreaking, but you turn 50, you forget words. So anyway, there's a word that
Yeah.
means, being able
Rooting.
to rooting. Thank you. Being able to root your Android phone. The other thing this reminded me of, and it wasn't mentioned in the article, but it's China, right? Because Google, from my understanding, has officially pulled support for Android from the Chinese marketplace. Is that right? And so China is now trying to create their own essentially fork of Android, which is open source, but figure out how they're going to do their own store and how all that is going to work. So that's an interesting thread that we've talked about and mentioned, and this raises the issue as well. So there were two other articles that I dropped under that category of culture war, which could have been under other things too. This is a PolitiFact article from June 25th. New Florida law doesn't require university students, faculty, and staff at public universities and colleges to register their political views with the state. Now, PolitiFact is run by the Poynter Institute, which is a nonprofit that does a lot around media literacy. And, this points to how important it is to fact check things. I had a friend actually, share that headline with me in person, but, pretty upset thing. And I was like, man, that sounds like Nazi Germany. Professors are having to register. But the law is somewhat ambiguously phrased. There is going to have to be surveys done, but it's not like every single, faculty member at a higher ed institution in Florida is going to have to say, hey, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat. But certainly it's a culture war, phenomenon, and fact checking is the reason why I put this in here as far as media literacy, right? Because anytime something is pushing an emotional button with us, and this one kind of did with me, I was like, oh my gosh, one of the first things we need to do is to fact check it. And then the last article I put in was a Washington Post article from July 20th that had to do with the suspension of conservative voices. The headline is Twitter suspends Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene for spreading COVID-19 misinformation. Now, it was just a short-term lock on her account. They said that some earlier locks that were automated and happened quickly had been accidental, but Twitter, as well as some other social media companies, are using a graduated approach to try and not just ban somebody and say you're off the platform forever, but to like you do with a lot of consequences with children or students. You have a warning, and then it can get a little more serious. So actually, I'll flow into these next two, and then I'm going to hand it to you because you put this EFF article in. Gizmodo, May 31st, and this one was shared by Alec Kuros. So this is a little bit older, but this has said that Twitter may start labeling your tweets based on how wrong you are. And, machine learning algorithms, we have had a lot of talk in tech companies about how these are going to, really assist in the moderation of horrific content and bad content. But, they're trying now to identify, did you say something, accurate or false about the COVID vaccines or some other kind of topic. And of course, we're having, errors happen here, but they're trying. And so anyway, I thought that was a pretty interesting development. And then this last one, which I'll then toss back to you, was excellent. I read this article before the show that you put in. EFF, July 16th, right or left, you should be worried about big tech censorship. Do you want to give us a little summary of that and any of your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's an interesting article, and it's one of those that I would say that it's worth your time to go read it because of the detailed arguments they give about the problem with censorship. And to be clear, Wes and I have been talking about for literally years on the podcast that we have to find a way to work together to regulate these. But censorship as a broad concept isn't going to fix anything. And in fact, it makes it complicated to even use the word censorship when it regards private platforms like Facebook, YouTube, etc. But Cory Doctorow, who is a longtime expert in this arena, for lack of a better way of putting it, talks about why it's problematic for us to have censorship on various networks across the huge silos. And in fact, when he talks about things like the problem with having big tech control this as opposed to having smaller individuals involved, and the network effects of what happens when you start to introduce censorship-like processes in these various platforms. And then more importantly, the fact that you don't want to concentrate power in large tech silos with huge tech companies. I think that's something very important to think about and to I think guide your thinking and discussion about how to do things.
And one of the really important things he mentions in this article, which I have heard talk about, but not the specific act, is the Access Act. And the idea of interoperability, and not where I could just, grab my data and just have it in like downloaded files, but like I'd act like email. Email is interoperable today. So if I'm mad at Google and I want to get rid of Gmail, I can do that. What's even a better example, and he uses this in the article, is our cell phone number, right? Because we're able to port our number to different carriers. So unless you're sending me a text message via email or whatever, like you have no idea looking at my number, whether I'm with T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, or somebody else. And we have some interoperability because of the standards that exist. But tech companies have, not wanted that level of interoperability. And so the Access Act is something that, and Corey is pointing out, there's some really important things that we can do as far as advocacy. And I really, really like that recommendation to say, hey, contact your elected representatives and senators and let them know that you support this idea of an Access Act. Because one of the statistics in this is that Twitter is a 10th of the size of Facebook. I mean, Facebook is gargantuan, and that's that idea of network effects. And there's so many people. And he talks about, in addition to network effects, I think it's called the missing out. I don't know. There's another thing that we need to worry about, and that is that people aren't just going to join switching costs, is what he calls it. And so there's cost of switching. But yeah, it is an excellent article, a great overview of a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, as Jason said, for years with the tech correction, and hopefully, this is going to move forward in some reasoned ways, because as he points out, we have consensus among folks across the political spectrum that something needs to be done. We need to stop this. But I haven't really heard many headlines about the Access Act. This is my first article to read about it. And so maybe we can play roles in helping educate our elected representatives about this, because that idea of interoperability and, whether we should have, social platforms that, enable us to more easily move back and forth. Anyway, I don't think we're going to be getting there quickly, and Facebook is not going to give up its power at all easily. But
no.
as he also points out in there, if reforming Section 230 was a solution that would really help, then why would Facebook be advocating for it themselves? And anyway, it's lots of different issues that are here, and we all need to become both better educated about it, but I think also aware of paths of advocacy, because we don't just have to wring our hands or whatever and just complain to each other about this. There are some good proposals and some good discussions to have, and perhaps your elected officials. I mean, if there are things that Jason and I haven't heard of before, there's a good chance there may be some elected officials that don't consider themselves tech geeks that they may not have heard of either. So the Access Act was definitely one of the things I was like, oh, okay, cool, glad to know about that.
Right, and also a good definite or a good defense of Section 232, which I think was also something that was important in the article, and talking about why getting rid of it is not going to fix things like a lot of folks advocate for.
Yep, definitely. All right. Well, we're approaching the top of the hour. We have time for a few more articles. Anything else you want to pick up? We did a pretty good job actually tonight.
Yeah, we got through most of the stuff tonight.
How about the vaccination one? Did you see that one about Indiana? Okay, this is New York Times from yesterday, July 20th. A federal judge upholds Indiana University's vaccination requirement for students. And I don't know. I have several things here under the COVID headline, which is going to be kind of like, how do we get to technology, through this? There's certainly a social media aspect, but we're definitely, educators and we're going back to school. And this was a pretty significant, we talked about free speech and what the limits of that are vis-a-vis technology. And so, a group has been arguing that, forcing college students to have to get the vaccine is a violation of their autonomy and their rights. And, prominent anti-vax groups and lawyers have been leading that charge. And so this is evidently a precedent-setting sort of first-time decision for a higher court to rule that, yes, indeed, Indiana University can require that. So, again, I think there's probably a tenuous connection here to tech news. It is certainly related to the moment in which we are living in education and the questions that I think a lot of us are having about how are we going back to school? Are we going to have these restrictions again? Are we all going to be online again? I don't think we are. I think we're going to be more. I think face to face is going to come roaring back this year. But I thought that was a pretty that one definitely caught my attention yesterday.
Great.
All right, Geek of the Week, sir.
Sure. I just found an article delightful, and I want to mention it because I think it's worthy of your read. It's from the Smithsonian magazine tomorrow, actually. So one of those magazine articles where it appeared online before the print publication was officially released. But it is basically a history of the Oregon Trail and the Minnesota Education Computing Consortium, which is so much a part of my personal background in getting into computers. And I'm not sure how much I've talked about it on the show, but I was shocking to our listeners that I was a nerdy little elementary school kid in the 1980s, and starting with a particularly astute teacher, Mrs. Platisha, my 5th grade teacher, I started getting really into computers, and it helped that she had an Apple IIe in her classroom, and so much so that we ended up getting a school full of Apple IIes, and the principal put me in charge of setting them up in all of the classrooms. Here's little 5th grade Jason running around. And of course, I took this as an opportunity to really just stretch that out as long as I possibly could. Had to test the audio in the new computers, etc. But for those that weren't around then or weren't into computers quite yet, so many wonderful educational programs came from that Minnesota Educational Computing Consortium. And it does give kind of a bit of an oral history of the Oregon Trail, the folks that created it, and other games of that era. But if you remember the Bank Street Writer and the early print shop software and the Minnesota Education Computing Consortium, Oregon Trail, and Number Munchers, and all those great games, this article is amazing and it will delight you. And if you haven't heard of any of this stuff, I think it's worth knowing the history.
So that just takes me back, because 1995, when I was, doing my student teaching, we had the Apple IIe lab at Wheelock Elementary in Lubbock, Texas. Teachers had just gotten Apple Mac 580s, which didn't have CD drives, or at the time were not connected to the internet. What was that? And so we were just doing accelerated reader. But yes, going to the lab and having MECC programs, Oregon Trail, there was a lot of value to doing that. And honestly, there's a number of teachers that still have thought of, and even with iPads, that's what kids do. You go and plug them into these apps, and there can be value there, and there can be joy and wonder. But yes, there's more today. So I'm going to definitely check that out. That's awesome. My Geek of the Week is actually a Twitter moment. So Twitter moments are still there. They're just not very visible on the platform. If you put your Twitter ID in and then /moments, if you have any, or the user channel that you're looking at has any, you'll see them. Basically, they're aggregations and collections of tweets. You can have up to 100 tweets together. I know that a number of people in the conference last week use Wakelet in that same way, because you can just drop links and create an archive. But last week I was again in the Summer Institute in Digital Literacy, and there were a few tweets beyond the 100 that I have in there. But I think on Thursday I put that together, and it's just I think it's a reverse chronological list of the takeaways and links and resources that I had from the conference. So I've really enjoyed, for a number of years, instead of blogging the conference, tweeting the conference. And so I've done that for a number of years when I've participated in a conference, is creating a Twitter moment. I've experienced too in just making a big thread. So like putting one tweet and then just replying to that one tweet with every other tweet, to collect them, so they're just not all, so they have a little bit of organization. So anyway, if you're not aware of Twitter moments, they're a thing. They're still around. I thought that Twitter was going to deprecate them, but it's nice to have a built-in tool like that to be able to collect related tweets, and they don't have to just be your own. You can have other tweets and things like that. So there you go. And we've taken us to 1 hour. So Dr. Neifer, when you're not here sharing your wisdom with us, how can folks connect with you?
The best place to find me is Twitter. I'm a Tech Savvy Teach, and I love connecting with folks and also sharing articles about EdTech, Chromebooks, and also educational philosophy. Awesome.
And before I tell you where I am found, Peggy had a quick question. If there are issues tweeting resources from a conference, if it's a paid conference, I haven't ever run into that before. I mean, certainly if somebody has, copyrighted materials or things like that. I've had people get mad at me because they thought I had illegally recorded their session when I just blogged YouTube videos that they had used, in their session before. So, if people, that's one of those things that ISTE was starting to get better about, like saying, is recording allowed? What kinds of sharing would be permissible? So generally, and I certainly am this way, but I'm an oversharer. I think it's great to amplify ideas. And even when there's a paid presentation or something, our conference last week had DigiURI, which is for University of Rhode Island, but definitely Twitter hashtag, and really encouraging people to share out, to make those connections, to amplify ideas and let more people know about the conference. So I am W. Fryer on Twitter, and I've collected and aggregated the resources about where I'm sharing stuff, which includes a lot of backyard barbecue and cooking this summer, as we're still enjoying a couple more weeks off. All of that you can find at wesfryer.com/after. So this has been the EdTech Situation Room, episode 224, if you can believe it, ladies and gentlemen. And it's just an opportunity for Jason and I to get together, talk about tech news, and get on some soapboxes every once in a while. And hey, we didn't fall into too deep of a pothole with the tech correction tonight. So, bonus. Peggy, you're a good influence. We would encourage you to check out the show notes to tonight's show and all of our shows at edtechsr.com/links. At edtechsr.com, you can find not only our shows, but also small MP3 audio versions. You can always subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, because sometimes we're not here. And the best way to do that is usually on Twitter, but we'll also cross-post that to Facebook as well. So wherever you happen to be in space and time, we're glad that you've joined in, and we encourage you to stay safe, stay savvy, and we hope to see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night, everybody.